Hi, boys and girls. This is Coach John. This is an introduction to the Sicilian Con variation. Now, so this is what we would classify as an E6 Sicilian. So first we establish this, and this is really so this is where it kind of gets tricky of variations and stuff. So we tend to refer to these as the Paulsen. This is the Paulsen because Paulsen, a famous player, used to play this. Actually, there was two brothers. One was better than the other though. And it's not till when we get to the move A6 that we call it the con. And the idea is to maybe move our queen to C7 and things like that. Now we can also play the move knight to C6 in the E6 Sicilian, and this would have another name which is called a Taimanov, but that's a completely similar opening. And it's actually a little bit more popular too. The con variation is slightly different. I prefer the con. So this is what I recommend to my students. Anyway, so we have a famous game from Boris Spassky versus Bobby Fischer back in the World Championship. The 21st game, 1972. Fischer used this with success. Now, here, white could choose the idea of C4, which is what we call the bind. And the bind is played against a couple of different systems. For my more advanced players who play the dragon and stuff, you oftentimes have heard it. You can do the same thing against the con. In fact, I would recommend that as white. Anyways, here Spassky played knight to C3, and most of your opponents will play knight to C3. And here Fischer played knight to C6, and after bishop to E3, knight to F6, bishop to D3. Here, black played a really interesting move, D5. Now, the first question is, well, what principle did he violate? And there is so Bobby Fischer is doing something that's out of the norm here. But that's what part of being a great player is to know when the exceptions are. For example, the classic example is I could tell you not to move your knight to the edge of the rim, but if in a particular move, moving your knight to the edge of the rim wins you the queen or the game, then you should do that move. Here D5 was played. And after pawn takes, the center is opened up with the king still in the center. We oftentimes don't want to do that. We'll check the reference database now and see here. What is the most common move? D5 is one of those moves where that's the point of E6, is we eventually want to play D5. But playing D5 at the right time is also the most important thing. So we see here in this variation that D5 is in fact the most common move. It's Queen C7, which kind of transposes into the similar stuff that we normally play. So for example, let's say that you played Queen C7, and if white were to castle, and here probably D5 wouldn't be as effective because now the king would be in the center and the rook could come for the check potentially in some variations. So it would be a little bit different. Here we see the ideas of knight to E5 or pawn to B5. So anyways, but D5 is a perfectly fine move in this particular position. But if you were to try to do it like with Queen C7 and then when the the king's already castled, then that wouldn't be good. All right, so going back to it, so D5 here, the center's open. So white's all right, I want to get my king castled. So I can play rook to E1, which makes sense. So he castles. Now bishop to D6, a very dynamic move, attacking the king on the diagonal. The knight's here on D4. So the square H2 is a little vulnerable. And we'll come back to that later on in the game. So here white played knight takes c6, which wasn't probably the best move for a couple of reasons. One, um, didn't he help like connect the pawns here in the center? Didn't he help turn an isolated pawn into a strong center pawn? And two, we're trading down pieces. Maybe not the best. One move could have been pawn to h3, and now that would have maybe took away some of the threats on with knight to g4, bishop g4, or bishop takes h2. And then after castles, queen d2, queen c7, and that's a normal game in the con. But instead, after knight takes, pawn takes, bishop to d4, and I guess his idea was to try to create some weaknesses over here. But after castles, queen to f3, we have another principle being violated, and that is black doesn't care in this particular position, in this example, and be careful with this, but they don't care about doubling their pawns with the queens coming out to the board. So after bishop to e6, white could have played, bishop takes, queen takes, pawn takes, but white would be maybe in some trouble here because we have two bishops versus a bishop and a knight. Black has the strong center pawns, and he has the open files for his rooks to attack. So the piece activity is much better here. Instead, he played rook to e1, and then after c5, he was forced to exchange. So he kind of realized once he played queen f3 and then bishop to e6, what happened is that Spassky thought to himself, wow, Fischer does not care about me doubling his pawns. That's interesting. Why does he not care about me doubling the pawn? So therefore, he then played rook to e1. He's like, all right, well, if he, and he probably figured out one of the reasons why. And then he's like, well, if Fischer doesn't care about me doubling his pawns, then I'm not going to do it, because what good is that? But after rook to e1, pawn to c5, he's forced to exchange. And, we're going to be able to play rook to b8. We're going to play bishop to d4 or e5 and put the pressure on here. So rook comes to d8, bishop back to e2 to attack the weakness, rook to b8, which attacks the pawn, and here b3, one of those weakening moves, one of those moves where you don't want to do it unless you absolutely have to. Let's look at what would have been a better move in this position. Pull up the engine here, and well, so I mean, black is just slightly better, and b3 is a candidate, so we can't fault him too much. But after pawn b3, c4. Okay. All right. So Spassky's play wasn't even that terrible. It just, it probably came back to before with this whole idea of trying to double up the pawns. The point is that this was not an advantage for him. This did nothing for him to gain an advantage. So after pawn c4, black has a really good game. Their threat is to play. If he were to take, then we play this move and we're completely winning. It's a pin. Rook to d3 and pawn to d4 wins the piece. So instead he plays here, takes, rook takes, bishop takes, king takes, and rook takes rook. And here what he was hoping is that his superior pawn structure would be enough, and a couple of pawns would be enough against the exchange. Let's consult the engine one more time here. Yeah, so after bishop takes, black was slightly better still. And that's kind of what the objective in the opening is that we can't dream of when we're playing black that every game that our opponents are going to play terrible moves that gives huge advantages. That's really not the goal with black. That's kind of the goal with white. White is like, all right, I want to crush black in 20 moves. Black is like, all right, I want to make sure that I stop their threats. I want to, that's what they call Sicilian defense, because first you have to defend, because white has the advantage. They go first. But that's not the end all be all. Anyways, this is an introduction in the con, an E6 Sicilian. Some of my more advanced students are playing it. Anyways, this is Coach John, and I'll see you later. Bye.